Hello, I'm Brandon Roberts. Welcome to my studio. Hi, my name is Brandon Roberts. I'm a composer for film and television. I grew up in Monterey, Carmel area, and jazz and Monterey Jazz Festival were a huge part of that area. And I started originally as a jazz guitarist and then slowly segued into film composition when I realized I wouldn't make a living as a jazz guitarist. So, but I loved film and I loved film composing and it was a great way to kind of combine composition with film. So I attended USC, the Scoring for Motion Pictures and Television program they have there, and had some amazing teachers. Buddy Baker was there, and Christopher Young, and Leonard Roseman was there. And from that point on, just like the rest of my colleagues, we were just scrounging after we got out of school, trying to get any gigs we could, and I eventually landed, like my first kind of break was working for Bear McCreary when he was on Battlestar Galactica. And that was a great time because I learned to write and orchestrate very fast because he works very quickly. And shortly after that, I got my second big break, which was writing and assisting Marco Beltrami. Writing for and assisting Marco Beltrami. And that is match made in heaven. I think I'm going on about 9 or 10 years working with him and Buck Sanders. And those two guys I would lay down in traffic for. And fortunately, they work on a variety of different types of projects. So everything from horror, obviously, which was kind of his Marco's beginnings with like Scream, all the way up to action movies like Die Hard and then some fantasy movies like Seventh Son or Gods of Egypt. So from that point, at the same time that that's happening, I think most composers are in a similar situation where they work with somebody high up in the food chain who and then they also are kind of trying to work on their own gigs at the same time and build their own name. And so most recently I worked on a film called Unbroken, Path to Redemption, which was a sequel to Angelina Jolie's original film about Louis Zamperini. And that was my most recent endeavor. So Unbroken, Path to Redemption, I needed to find some sort of signature sound for Louis Zamperini's PTSD issues that he's suffering after he comes back from World War II. And one of the things I thought would be neat to try was exploring the resonant qualities of actual artillery shells. So I acquired Japanese artillery shells from World War II on eBay, and then sampled them and tried every variation of sound making it can do. I bowed it and struck it, sampled it, repitched it, and everything. And I used that as a palette to kind of harken back to his suffering at the hands of the bird, his main captor and torturer in World War II. What I found was it makes enough sound, different types of sound, that I could create an entire kind of tapestry of sound. Even if you're not aware that it's an artillery shell, you can tell that there's some sort of common thread in it. And so that became kind of the signature sound, in addition to a couple more traditional elements of Louis Zamperini, the main character's suffering in World War II. What I found that was interesting was I had to supplement it with other elements to kind of make the stuff I had done kind of fill in the blanks of what was and wasn't working. So one of the things I did was looked into Soundiron's sample library of artillery shells, and they complemented the work I had done with my artillery shells wonderfully. So they actually had a better centered pitch. They blended really nicely with the stuff I had done, and they created a very nice hybrid sound. There's a couple pivotal scenes in the film in which Louis Zamperini is suffering from PTSD, and then it's accentuated by his struggles with alcoholism. And one of the most poignant scenes in the film is this argument with his wife and in the bedroom, and it escalates and borders on abusive. For that, I wanted to have some sort of insidious pulse that starts low, almost subconscious. And then I started adding elements, and so I started with like a low pulse of the artillery shells pitched down, and then I started adding pitched elements of the shells, and they kind of come into different places. And the idea is that his PTSD is starting to swell up, starting to boil over. And the whole thing, by the time it's done, you don't realize there's about 10 different elements that have all come in. And so that was one scene in particular where the artillery shells were incredibly useful in portraying that emotion subconsciously. So if I play just the mix, the final mix of what I did, of all the elements together, you can hear that there's an underlying low pulse, which are the artillery shells pitched way down. And then I added in my artillery shells, the Unbroken artillery shells. And you can hear that they have like a crispness to them, but they don't have a lot of body. So I brought in the Soundiron shells, and to kind of create some of the body. And what I did there was duplicate the exact same pitched melodic pattern as I was doing on my shells, and then assigned the low pass cutoff to MIDI CC as well as the resonance, and I was able to hone in on the stuff that was missing from my shells. In other words, the body of the shells. If I wanted a little more crispness, I could bring up the cutoff. And if I wanted to bring out certain frequencies, then I would mess with the resonance and bring that up. So if I show you, I'll just play my shells for a second. So on my shells, there's a little bit of delay, a little bit of compression, there's obviously some EQ, and then a little bit of a plate reverb on it. If I now play the Soundiron shells, you can hear that the body of the shell is now there, whereas mine has a crispness, has an attack, but it's missing a large chunk of the mids. So in this case, and what's great about that is when the two get blended together, they fill in the gaps of each other and should sound cool, hypothetically. And what's great about that is on both of them, I'm messing a little bit with the filter. So as the cue progresses and as the scene becomes more intense, I'm basically adding a little bit more of the high end using the filters to try to give the thing some motion, some forward motion. And then if we hear it in context with the full mix one more time as a frame of reference here, here's what we got. The basis of the cue is variations on the artillery shells. So the first thing is to give it some sort of foundation. So a sound designer I worked with on this, Jason Scardamalia, took the shells and did some really cool stuff with it in terms of pitching it way down. And I got to give this guy props because he created this cool, like a back and forth sound that works great as a foundation. You can hear this pulse that I can then ride as necessary using the modulation or CC modulator to low pass filter it. So on this I have CC21 assigned to a low pass filter, and I'm able to open up the filter as the cue gets more and more intense. So then on top of that, then I needed to start building in all of the pitched artillery shells that create all the elements that you can hear that are much more in the sonic pitched hearing range than those. So I tend to spend most of my time over here in front of this monitor, and I do all my writing in Digital Performer. I have since school. And I think I'm a digital performer for life, so it's official. On Unbroken, Path to Redemption, I used a lot of synth stuff, and it's subtle, but it's in there. And so when I've been working with Marco Beltrami a lot, Buck Sanders, who writes with him, got me into modular synthesis. And so I made a lot of the sounds for the bird, a lot of the electronic sounds using this, and a whole lot of these, and a whole lot of frustration and trying to understand how modular synthesis works, but I made at least a dent in it on this gig. So I do some stuff. I have a Pro 2, DSi Pro 2 that I use also for like a lot of low bass stuff that I think cuts through nicely. And then I use this Moog Sub 37. I love this thing. And what it does that is so cool is you can actually sync all of the envelope generators, and you can sync a lot of, basically all the modulation sources, all the oscillators can sync, so you can actually create cool rhythmic effects that I've never heard before. And I can never replicate once I've made them. So that's the wonder of modular synthesis and non-plugin synthesis. And then this is just a duplicate rig where I also have all the slave computers on that I can kind of scroll through if need be, but that's not that interesting. I do all of my CC controlling using an iPad, and I decided a while back I could actually fit more stuff on here, whether it was kind of toggling through certain things I needed, or whether it was something as simple as faders, or if it was quantizing or changing note velocities. It was just better to have an interface all at my fingertips. I know a lot of guys use actually like full-on touch screens, and it's great. And then I have my XY controllers here if I need them. And then I am not a skilled keyboard player in the traditional way, so it made more sense for me to actually have my computer keyboard here so I could have better posture, and then I inset the music keyboard into the desk, and that actually has done wonders for my back, whereas I know a lot of guys actually have the keyboard pull out under the desk, but this was just a better setup for me. And Then, drawing your attention to this guy, this is what's called a guitar viol, and I use this all the time. It is like basically a bowed guitar in the sense of it's tuned like a guitar. It has 6 strings like a guitar, but it sounds more like a violin or an electric cello, and it's been wonderful. I use it on Unbroken, Path to Redemption all the time, and I'll layer it. I'll do all kinds of stuff and affect it, and that's a lifesaver. And then down here, I pretty much the guitar viol has a jack, and I just plug it into a couple of 500 series preamps, and so that is the setup. It's pretty concise. I have a couple slave computers in the closet, but for the most part, the setup's pretty concise, but I use everything a lot. So I highly recommend saving your money to buy gear. So that's pretty much the setup. It's pretty minimal, but I use all of the things quite a bit. So I don't have a big sprawling studio, but I definitely, everything gets used significantly.